Maria Chen stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office on the 48th floor, watching the city lights blur through her tears. In her trembling hand, she held a phone, the private line that only rang when everything was falling apart. Her company, Tech Vista Solutions, the empire she'd built from nothing over 15 years, was hemorrhaging money. $300 million lost in the last quarter alone. The board wanted her out. The media was circling like vultures. And despite hiring the best consultants money could buy, despite endless strategy sessions with her executive team, despite her own formidable intelligence that had built a billion-dollar company, she had no answers. Tomorrow, she would have to announce massive layoffs. 2,000 people, 2,000 families, would lose their livelihoods because she had failed them. The weight of it pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. Maria had stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped seeing the humanity in anything except numbers and projections and desperate solutions that never quite worked. The crisis had started 6 months earlier when their flagship product, an enterprise software platform, began experiencing catastrophic failures. Clients were fleeing. Competitors were capitalizing. She'd brought in crisis management experts from Harvard, MIT consultants, Silicon Valley advisors who charged $50,000 a day. They'd analyzed every line of code, restructured departments, implemented new protocols. Nothing worked. The problems persisted, growing worse each week like a cancer spreading through the company's core. Maria pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching the tiny figures move on the streets below. Real people with real lives, just like the employees she was about to destroy. She'd become so focused on saving the company that she'd forgotten what the company was supposed to be about, serving those people, creating value for them, making their lives better. It was nearly midnight when she finally left her office, exhausted and defeated. The executive floors were empty, eerily silent except for the hum of the HVAC system. As she walked toward the elevator, she noticed a light still on in the break room at the end of the hall. Through the doorway, she saw him, Jorge Ramirez, the night janitor, sitting at one of the small tables with a cup of coffee and what looked like a worn paperback book. Maria had seen Jorge countless times over the years, always nodded politely, but had never really looked at him. Now, something made her pause. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the simple human need to be around someone who wasn't judging her, analyzing her, or waiting for her to fail. "You're here late, Ms. Chen," Jorge said, looking up with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. His accent carried the warmth of his native El Salvador. "I could say the same about you," Maria replied, surprising herself by walking into the break room instead of toward the elevator. Jorge smiled. "I'm always here late. It's my job. You, though, you carry too much weight. I see it every night when I clean your office. The papers everywhere, the empty coffee cups, the lights on until dawn." Maria felt something crack inside her chest. When was the last time anyone had noticed her as a person, not just as a CEO? She sank into the chair across from him, suddenly too tired to maintain the facade. "I'm losing everything, Jorge. And I don't know how to fix it." Jorge was quiet for a moment, then pushed his coffee toward her. "Tell me," he said simply. And she did. For the next hour, Maria poured out everything: the software failures, the desperate consultants, the upcoming layoffs, the feeling that she'd somehow lost sight of what mattered. Jorge listened without interrupting, his weathered hands folded on the table, his attention complete and genuine. When she finally finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "May I ask you something, Ms. Chen?" "Of course. All these experts you hired, did any of them talk to the people who use your software every day? The regular people in the offices I clean at night?" Maria blinked. In 6 months of crisis management, through hundreds of meetings and millions of dollars in consulting fees, no one had suggested anything so basic. "What do you mean?" Jorge leaned forward. "Every night, I clean offices in 12 different buildings. I see the workers after everyone goes home. I see their screens, their notes, their frustrations written on sticky papers everywhere. I hear them complaining on late-night calls. Your software, Ms. Chen, it's not broken because of the code. It's broken because it doesn't work the way real people work. He pulled out his phone, opened a notes app, and showed her dozens of observations he'd written down over months. The accountant on the 23rd floor, she has to click 17 times to generate a simple report. She has notes showing how to remember the sequence. The project manager on 35? He keeps a printed guide because your drop-down menus are so confusing. They spend half their time fighting with the software instead of doing their jobs. Maria stared at the phone, her mind racing. All the expert analysis, all the code reviews, all the technical diagnostics, and they'd missed the obvious. They'd been so focused on the technology that they'd forgotten about the humans using it. How long have you been documenting this? She whispered. 4 months. I thought maybe it would be useful to someone someday. Jorge shrugged. I'm just a janitor, so I didn't think anyone would listen. But you asked, Ms. Chen. And you listened like you cared about the answer. Maria felt tears streaming down her face, not tears of despair this time, but tears of relief, of hope, of shame that it had taken hitting rock bottom for her to truly see the people around her. Jorge, you're not just anything. You might have just saved this company. Can I hire you as a consultant? Jorge laughed, a warm sound that filled the sterile break room. You don't need to hire me. I already work for you. But maybe instead of paying consultants millions, you could ask the people who actually use your product what they need. The next morning, Maria walked into the emergency board meeting with Jorge's notes and a new proposal. Instead of layoffs, she suggested they halt the consulting contracts and redirect those funds into a complete user experience overhaul. She proposed forming focus groups with actual clients, having her developers spend time watching real users, and making simplicity the core principle of everything they built. The board was skeptical, but Maria's conviction was absolute. For the first time in months, she spoke not from spreadsheets and projections, but from genuine understanding of what their company needed to be. Over the next 6 months, TechVista was transformed. The development team spent weeks shadowing clients, watching them work, listening to their frustrations. They simplified interfaces, reduced clicks, eliminated confusion. Jorge became an unofficial advisor, sharing insights from his nightly observations. More importantly, Maria instituted a policy: every executive, including herself, had to spend 1 day each month doing frontline work, customer service, installation support, basic troubleshooting, to stay connected to the human reality of their product. The turnaround was dramatic. Within a year, client satisfaction scores soared. Word spread about the company that actually listened. Revenue rebounded, then exceeded projections. The 2,000 jobs were saved, and TechVista began hiring again. But the real change was in Maria herself. She still worked hard, but she also walked the halls, learned her employees' names, asked about their families. She had lunch in the cafeteria. She listened. And every Friday night, she met Jorge in that same break room for coffee, where he shared his observations and she shared her gratitude for the simple wisdom that had saved not just her company, but her humanity. Sometimes the most valuable expertise doesn't come from credentials or degrees. Sometimes it comes from someone who simply pays attention, who sees people instead of problems, who understands that at the heart of every business are human beings trying to make their lives a little bit better. Maria had learned that the hard way, and she would never forget it.